The dust storm rolled through Independence, California like a living thing, coating everything in grit and despair. But it was nothing compared to the storm raging inside Tessa Zimmerman as she watched her mother convulse with fever on their threadbare mattress in the corner of their one-room shack at the edge of town. The year was 1878, and consumption had taken hold of Margaret Zimmerman with a viciousness that no amount of prayer or home remedies could touch, and the doctor had been clear that without proper medicine, expensive medicine imported all the way from San Francisco, her mother would not survive another month. Tessa pressed a damp cloth to her mother's burning forehead, her own body trembling with exhaustion after 3 nights without sleep, watching and waiting and hoping for some miracle that never came. At 22 years old, she had already lived a harder life than most, losing her father to a mine collapse 5 years earlier, working herself raw at the town laundry to keep them fed. But even that meager income was not enough now, not when the medicine cost more than she could earn in 6 months of backbreaking labor. "Mama, please hold on," Tessa whispered, but her mother's eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow and rattling in her chest like dried beans in a tin can. The desperation had been building for weeks, crushing Tessa under its weight until she could barely think straight. And when her mother had finally opened her eyes that morning and spoken the words that would haunt Tessa forever, she had felt something inside her break clean in two. "You have to let me go," Margaret had rasped, her skeletal hand gripping Tessa's wrist with surprising strength. "Use what money we have for yourself, child. Do not waste it on a dying woman." But Tessa could not, would not let her mother die, not when there was still a chance, however slim, however terrible the price might be. That was what had led her to the saloon that afternoon, her stomach churning with shame and fear as she approached the owner, a hard-faced woman named Delilah, who ran her establishment with an iron fist and had a reputation for making deals that left people trapped and desperate. "I need money," Tessa had said, her voice barely above a whisper. $200 for medicine." Delilah had looked her up and down with eyes that missed nothing, taking in Tessa's worn dress, her calloused hands, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and grinding poverty. "And what do you have to offer in return, girl? You got no property, no assets worth anything." "I can work," Tessa had said quickly. "I will work however long it takes to pay you back." "Working at the laundry," Delilah had laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You would be working until you were old and gray, and I do not have that kind of patience." "No, if you want that kind of money, you need to offer something more valuable." The implications had hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating, but before Tessa could respond, another voice had cut through the tension. "I will give you $200 for an indentured contract." 3 years of service. Tessa had turned to see a man standing in the corner of the saloon, someone she had not noticed before in her desperate rush to find help. He was tall and weathered, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and eyes that were hard to read in the dim light filtering through the dirty windows. His clothes marked him as a man of some means, a rancher perhaps, with leather chaps worn smooth from long days in the saddle and a silver buckle on his belt that caught the light. "Cole Thatcher," he had introduced himself, stepping forward with a measured grace that spoke of confidence born from capability. "I own a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. I need help with the place, and you look like someone who knows how to work hard." Tessa had stared at him, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences, weighing the horror of selling herself into servitude against the certainty of watching her mother die. 3 years felt like an eternity, but it was better than what Delilah had been implying, and at least she would be working on a ranch instead of in a place that would destroy what remained of her dignity and hope. 3 years, she had repeated, her voice hollow. And you will give me the money now. Today, right now, Cole had confirmed, pulling a leather pouch from his pocket and counting out bills that represented more money than Tessa had seen in her entire life. But you come with me as soon as you have secured the medicine for your mother. No delays, no second thoughts. The transaction had been completed with brutal efficiency, papers drawn up by the saloon owner who kept such documents on hand for occasions just like this, and Tessa had signed her name with a hand that shook so badly she could barely form the letters. Her mother, when she had returned with the precious bottles of medicine and explained what she had done, had wept and cursed and tried to refuse, but Tessa had been firm, forcing the first dose down her mother's throat and refusing to listen to her protests. "It is done, Mama," Tessa had said, her voice breaking despite her determination to stay strong. "You will live, and that is all that matters." But Margaret had grabbed her daughter's face between her trembling hands, tears streaming down her gaunt cheeks. "You sold yourself, my beautiful girl. You sold yourself to a stranger because of me. What have I done? What have I done to you?" "You did nothing," Tessa had whispered fiercely. "This is my choice. You are going to get better, and in 3 years I will come back and we will have a life again. Just hold on, Mama, please." The next morning had come too quickly. The sun rising over the Sierra Nevada mountains in a blaze of gold and crimson that seemed to mock the darkness of Tessa's situation. Cole had arrived at dawn with a horse and wagon, his expression unreadable as he waited for her to gather her few belongings and say goodbye to her mother, who was already looking slightly better after a night of medicine and rest. "I will make arrangements for someone to check on her," Cole had said quietly as Tessa climbed into the wagon, her throat too tight to speak. "To make sure she takes the medicine properly and has food. That was part of our deal, though it was not written down." Tessa had turned to look at him sharply, surprise cutting through her misery. "You would do that?" "I am not a cruel man," Cole had replied, clicking his tongue to set the horses moving. "I need help on my ranch, and you need money for your mother. That does not mean I want her to suffer or die while you are working for me." The words should have been comforting, but Tessa felt too numb to process them, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. She watched Independence fade into the distance behind them, the small collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets that had been her entire world growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the vast expanse of sagebrush and rocky hills that stretched in every direction. The journey to Cole's ranch took most of the day, the wagon rattling over rough terrain that tested every bone in Tessa's body and gave her too much time to think about what she had done. Cole did not speak much during the ride, his attention focused on navigating the narrow trails that wound through the landscape. But occasionally, he would point out landmarks or mention something about the land, his voice carrying a note of pride that suggested he had built something he valued out here in the wilderness. When they finally crested a rise, and Tessa saw the ranch spread out below them in a valley carved by a narrow creek, she felt a flicker of something that might have been relief or might have been dread. She could not tell which. The main house was larger than she had expected, a solid structure of timber and stone that looked like it could withstand anything the elements threw at it, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch with livestock and land to manage. "You will stay in the main house," Cole said as they descended into the valley. "There is a room off the kitchen that should suit you. I live alone, have for the past 3 years since my parents passed, so there is plenty of space and plenty of work to go around." Tessa nodded, still unable to find words that would not come out broken and raw. When they reached the house and Cole helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady and impersonal on her arm, She forced herself to look at him directly for the first time since they had left town. "Thank you," she managed to say, "for helping my mother, for making arrangements to check on her." Cole held her gaze for a moment, something shifting in his dark eyes that she could not quite interpret. "Like I said, I am not cruel, but I will expect you to work hard, Tessa. This ranch does not run itself, and I need someone who can handle difficult tasks without complaint." "I can work," Tessa said, lifting her chin despite the exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead. "I have been working since I was old enough to stand. I will not disappoint you." The first weeks on the ranch were harder than anything Tessa had endured before, and that was saying something considering the life she had led. Cole woke her before dawn every morning, and the work began immediately. An endless cycle of feeding livestock, mucking out stalls, hauling water, mending fences, washing clothes, cooking meals, and 100 other tasks that left her so tired by nightfall that she would collapse on her narrow bed without even removing her boots. But Cole was true to his word about checking on her mother, hiring a woman from town named Mrs. Patterson to visit Margaret twice a week, bringing food and making sure she took her medicine properly. The reports that came back were good, better than Tessa had dared to hope, and knowing that her mother was recovering made the back-breaking labor bearable, gave her a reason to push through even when her body screamed for rest. Cole himself was a puzzle that Tessa could not quite solve. He was demanding but fair, expecting excellence but never asking her to do anything he would not do himself. He worked alongside her more often than not, his presence a constant reminder of the contract that bound her to this place, but also strangely comforting in a way she did not want to examine too closely. He was quiet by nature, not given to unnecessary conversation, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and sometimes surprisingly gentle. One morning about 6 weeks after her arrival, Tessa was carrying buckets of water from the creek to the vegetable garden she had started planting behind the house when she stumbled on a loose rock and went down hard, the buckets flying from her hands and drenching her completely in ice-cold water. She lay there for a moment, stunned and gasping, pain shooting through her ankle where she had twisted it, and then she heard Cole's boots hitting the ground as he ran over from the barn. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her and running his hands over her ankle with a competence that spoke of experience treating injuries. His touch was careful, almost gentle, and Tessa found herself staring at his face, noticing for the first time the small scar above his left eyebrow and the way his jaw tightened when he concentrated. "It is just twisted," she managed to say, though the pain made her voice tight. "I will be fine in a moment. You will rest it for the remainder of the day," Cole said firmly, standing and lifting her into his arms before she could protest. "I cannot have you permanently injuring yourself because you are too stubborn to admit when you need to stop." The sensation of being carried, of being held against his chest with his arms solid and secure around her, sent a shock of awareness through Tessa that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with the sudden, unwelcome realization that Cole Thatcher was not just her employer, not just the man who owned her labor for 3 years, but a person she was starting to see as something more. The thought terrified her, because getting attached to him, allowing herself to feel anything beyond gratitude and obligation, was a complication she could not afford. But as Cole settled her on the chair in the kitchen and went to fetch strips of cloth to wrap her ankle, his movements efficient and sure, Tessa felt something shift inside her that she could not quite push back into place. He had saved her mother, had given her work instead of something degrading, had treated her with a respect she had not expected, and now he was tending to her injury with a care that made her throat tight with emotions she did not want to name. "Why did you buy my contract?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could think better of it. You could have hired anyone. You could have gone through proper channels instead of making a deal in a saloon with a desperate woman. Cole paused in his wrapping of her ankle, his expression thoughtful. Because I saw someone who was willing to sacrifice everything for the person she loved. That kind of loyalty, that kind of strength, is rare. I figured if you would fight that hard for your mother, you would work that hard for anything you committed to doing. The honesty in his words hit Tessa like a physical blow, stripping away some of the protective numbness she had been clinging to since the day she signed the contract. I thought you just needed cheap labor. I do need help, Cole admitted, finishing with her ankle and sitting back on his heels to look at her directly. But I could have hired a ranch hand from town if that was all I wanted. I saw something in you, Tessa. A fire that has not been put out despite everything life has thrown at you. That is worth more than gold in this country. Tessa did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But she felt something warm and dangerous kindle in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Over the following months, as summer gave way to fall, and the air turned crisp with the promise of winter, that hope grew despite her best efforts to contain it. Cole began teaching her things that went beyond simple ranch work, showing her how to ride properly, how to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the behavior of animals, how to handle a rifle in case predators threatened the livestock. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing, their conversations growing deeper and more personal as the weeks passed. Tessa learned that Cole had inherited the ranch from his father, who had built it from nothing over 30 years of hard work and determination. She learned that his mother had died of fever when he was 25, and his father had followed 2 years later, leaving Cole alone on a piece of land that was both his pride and his prison, because maintaining it by himself was nearly impossible. I thought about selling, Cole admitted one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. After my father died, I thought maybe it would be easier to just let it go and move on to something else, but this place is in my blood. Every fence post, every building, every acre represents years of sweat and sacrifice. I could not walk away from it. I understand, Tessa said quietly. My father died in a mine collapse trying to earn enough money to buy a small piece of land where we could grow our own food. He wanted to build something permanent, something that would last beyond his lifetime. He never got the chance, but I remember how he would talk about it, the light in his eyes when he described what it would be like. Cole turned to look at her, and in the fading light she could see something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. You miss him. Every day, Tessa said, her voice catching. And I miss my mother even though I know she is getting better. Mrs. Patterson says she is almost back to her old self, strong enough to do light work around the house. But I will not see her for nearly 3 more years, and that feels like forever. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the reality of the contract that bound them, and for a moment Tessa thought Cole might say something that would change everything, but he only nodded and stood, his expression unreadable. We should get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we need to move the cattle to the winter pasture, and it will be a long day. But that night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the wind whistle through the eaves, Tessa allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been fighting for months. She was falling in love with Cole Thatcher, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness, with the way he looked at her sometimes like she was something precious instead of something he owned. The realization was both wonderful and terrible, because she had no idea if he felt anything similar, and even if he did, The contract between them complicated everything in ways she did not know how to navigate. The winter that followed was harsh, with storms that roared down from the mountains and buried the valley in snow that made even simple tasks feel impossible. But the ranch house was warm and solid, and Tessa found herself spending more time inside with Cole, cooking and mending and talking while the wind howled outside. The forced proximity revealed sides of him she had not seen before, a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, a vulnerability when he spoke about his parents that made her want to comfort him the way he had comforted her. One evening in late December, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Cole reached into a drawer and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I got you something," he said, his voice gruff with something that might have been embarrassment. "For Christmas." Tessa stared at him in surprise. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to," Cole said, holding out the package. "Open it." Inside was a book, a beautiful leather-bound volume of poetry that must have cost him dearly in a place like Independence where books were precious and rare. Tessa ran her fingers over the smooth cover, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. "I noticed you reading that old Bible in your room," Cole said quietly. "Figured you might like something else to read during the long evenings." "If you do not like poetry, I can exchange it for something else." "It is perfect," Tessa whispered, clutching the book to her chest. "Thank you, Cole. I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Cole replied, but his eyes were warm in the firelight, and when he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. That night marked a shift in their relationship, a crossing of some invisible line that had kept them at a careful distance from each other. They began touching more often, small gestures that could be dismissed as accidental, but felt deliberate and significant. Cole's hand on her shoulder as he passed behind her in the kitchen, Tessa's fingers brushing his as she handed him his coffee in the morning, their knees touching as they sat together on the porch in the evenings. The tension built slowly, sweetly, until Tessa felt like she could barely breathe when Cole was near, her entire body hyper-aware of his presence. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her stomach flutter, and she knew that he was fighting the same battle she was, trying to maintain some sense of propriety when everything inside them was screaming to break down the walls they had built. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived it brought with it news that changed everything. Mrs. Patterson arrived at the ranch on a bright April morning with a letter from Margaret, and Tessa tore it open with shaking hands, desperate for word from her mother. The letter was long and detailed, filled with updates about life in Independence and assurances that Margaret was fully recovered, working again at a shop in town and saving money for the day when Tessa would return. But it was the final paragraph that made Tessa's breath catch in her throat. "My dearest daughter, I have been thinking long and hard about the sacrifice you made for me, and I cannot bear the weight of it any longer. I have spoken with a lawyer in town, and he tells me that if the person who holds your contract is willing to release you, the agreement can be dissolved. I have saved almost $50, and I will find a way to earn the rest to pay Mr. Thatcher back for his investment. Please, my darling girl, come home. I am well now, and I cannot stand the thought of you working like a servant because of me." Tessa read the letter 3 times, her emotions a chaotic swirl of relief and confusion, and something that felt uncomfortably close to disappointment. She should be ecstatic at the possibility of freedom, at the chance to return to her mother and resume her life, but instead she felt torn in half, pulled between the love she had always known and the love that had grown unexpectedly in this wild, beautiful place. She found Cole in the barn, repairing a saddle that had cracked during the winter, and stood in the doorway for a long moment watching him work, memorizing the way the light fell across his shoulders, the concentration on his face, the capable movements of his hands. "My mother wants to buy out my contract," Tessa said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "She has saved $50 and plans to earn the rest to pay you back." Cole's hand stilled on the leather, his entire body going tense. "I see." "She says she is fully recovered," Tessa continued. "That she cannot bear the thought of me working here any longer because of her. She wants me to come home." Slowly, Cole set down the saddle and turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "What do you want, Tessa?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with everything they had not said to each other over the past year. All the feelings they had danced around and denied and tried to ignore. Tessa felt her heart hammering in her chest, knowing that her answer to this question would determine the course of the rest of her life. "I do not know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "A year ago, I would have given anything to hear that I could go home, that the contract could be dissolved. But now, I do not know what I want anymore." Cole took a step toward her, then another, closing the distance between them until he was close enough that she could see the emotion swirling in his dark eyes, all the careful control finally cracking to reveal what lay beneath. "I will release you from the contract," he said quietly. "If that is what you want, I will tear it up right now and you can go home to your mother. I will not hold you here against your will, Tessa. I never wanted to trap you." "Then what did you want?" Tessa asked, the words barely above a whisper. Cole reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but sure. "This. You. From the moment I saw you in that saloon, desperate and brave and so damn beautiful it made my chest ache, I wanted you. Not as a servant, not as cheap labor. I wanted you in my life, and buying your contract was the only way I could think of to make that happen without you running scared. I know it was wrong. I know I should have just courted you properly, but I was not sure you would give me the chance." The confession hit Tessa like a thunderbolt, shattering every assumption she had made about their relationship and rebuilding it into something new and infinitely more precious. "You wanted me," she repeated, hardly daring to believe it. "Want," Cole corrected, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Present tense. I want you, Tessa Zimmerman. Not for 3 years, not as someone bound by a contract, but as my partner, my equal, my wife if you will have me. But I will not keep you here if your heart is calling you elsewhere. I love you too much to cage you." The words "I love you" seemed to echo in the barn, filling all the empty spaces, and Tessa felt tears spill down her cheeks as the truth of her own feelings crashed over her with undeniable force. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I have loved you for months, maybe from the beginning, but I was too afraid to admit it because I thought you only saw me as someone who worked for you. But I do not want to go back to independence, Cole. I want to stay here with you if you truly mean what you are saying." "I have never meant anything more in my entire life," Cole said fiercely. And then he was kissing her, his mouth claiming hers with a hunger and tenderness that made her knees go weak. Tessa kissed him back with everything she had, pouring a year of longing and hope and love into the connection, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pressed herself against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers and laughed, the sound filled with relief and joy. "I have been wanting to do that for so long." "Then why did you wait?" Tessa asked, unable to keep from smiling even as more tears slipped down her face. "Because I did not want you to think I expected it, that it was part of the contract," Cole explained. "I wanted you to come to me freely, to choose me because you wanted to, not because you felt obligated." "I choose you," Tessa said firmly, framing his face with her hands. "I choose this life, this ranch, this future, But I need to see my mother, Cole. I need to tell her in person that I am staying, that I am happy. Then we will go to Independence tomorrow, Cole said immediately. And while we are there, we will visit the courthouse and make this official. I want to marry you, Tessa. I want the whole town to know that you are my wife, not my servant. The next day they made the journey to Independence together, and Tessa's heart felt like it might burst from her chest when she saw her mother standing in the doorway of a small but tidy house on the edge of town, looking healthy and strong and so much like her old self that Tessa barely recognized her. "Mama!" Tessa cried, flying from the wagon and into her mother's arms, holding her tight and breathing in the familiar scent that meant home and safety and love. Margaret wept and laughed and held her daughter at arm's length to look at her properly. "Let me see you, my darling girl. You look so different, stronger somehow, and happy unless I am reading you wrong." "I am happy," Tessa confirmed, glancing back at Cole, who had remained by the wagon, giving them space for their reunion. "Mama, this is Cole Thatcher, and I need to tell you something important." Over tea in Margaret's small kitchen, Tessa explained everything, the words tumbling out in a rush as she described the past year, the work on the ranch, the way her feelings for Cole had grown and deepened, and his proposal that had changed everything. Margaret listened without interrupting, her eyes moving between her daughter and the tall cowboy who sat quietly at the table, his hand holding Tessa's like he was afraid she might disappear. "You are certain this is what you want?" Margaret asked finally, her gaze sharp on Tessa's face. "You are not staying because you feel obligated, because you think you owe him something." "I am staying because I love him," Tessa said simply. "And because the ranch feels more like home than anywhere I have ever been." "I know it is not what you wanted for me, Mama, but it is what I want for myself." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, and then she turned to Cole with an expression that was both fierce and assessing. "Will you treat her well? Will you make her happy?" "I will spend every day of my life trying to," Cole said quietly. "She is the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I do not take that lightly." Something in Margaret's expression softened, and she reached out to cover their joined hands with her own. "Then you have my blessing, both of you. But Tessa, you must promise to visit me, to not disappear into that ranch and forget about your old mother." "Never," Tessa said fervently. "We will visit as often as we can, and you must come stay with us sometimes. There is plenty of room, and I want you to see what Cole has built, what we will build together." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the Independence Courthouse, with Margaret and Mrs. Patterson standing as witnesses, and the justice of the peace pronouncing them husband and wife with a warmth that suggested he had performed happier duties in his career. Tessa wore a new dress that Margaret had insisted on buying, a simple blue cotton that made her eyes look bright and clear, and Cole wore his best shirt and a string tie that he kept adjusting nervously until Tessa reached up and stilled his hands with her own. "You look perfect," she whispered, and the smile he gave her in return was worth more than all the gold in California. The ride back to the ranch as husband and wife felt different somehow, weighted with new meaning and possibility. Cole held her hand the entire way, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, and when they finally arrived home, he insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It is tradition," he said, setting her down gently in the main room of the house. "And I want to do this right, Tessa. I want to give you everything you deserve." "You already have," Tessa said softly, pulling him down for a kiss that started gentle and quickly became something more heated, more urgent. They made their way to Cole's bedroom, the one she had never entered during her year on the ranch. And as they came together in the golden afternoon light, Tessa felt like every hardship she had endured, every sacrifice she had made, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The months that followed their wedding were the happiest of Tessa's life. She and Cole worked the ranch together as true partners, making decisions jointly and building something that belonged to both of them equally. Cole tore up the old contract in a private ceremony, burning it in the fireplace and scattering the ashes to the wind. And Tessa felt the last chains of obligation fall away, leaving only love and choice in their place. They visited Margaret regularly, bringing her back to the ranch for extended stays during the summer when the weather was fine, and the valley was lush with green grass and wildflowers. Margaret bloomed in the clean air and peaceful surroundings, and watching her mother laugh and smile and regain all the vitality that illness had stolen brought Tessa a joy that felt almost painful in its intensity. As autumn approached again, marking nearly 2 years since that desperate day in the saloon, Tessa realized that her monthly courses had not come, and the tiredness and nausea she had been experiencing suddenly made perfect sense. She told Cole one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, the words simple and direct. "I am carrying your child." Cole went very still beside her, and then he turned to look at her with such wonder and love in his eyes that Tessa felt tears prick her own. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be," Tessa confirmed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Probably due sometime in the spring. Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Cole said roughly, pulling her into his arms and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "You have given me everything, Tessa. A partner, a purpose, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of it." Margaret cried when they told her the news, happy tears that she did not bother trying to hide, and she immediately began knitting small blankets and clothes, her hands never idle. The pregnancy was not easy, with sickness that lasted well into the 4th month and aches that made even simple tasks challenging. But Cole was attentive and patient, taking on extra work so Tessa could rest, rubbing her back when it ached, and reading to her from the poetry book he had given her that first Christmas. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1880, arriving into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to anyone within a mile of the ranch. Cole held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes and marveled at the perfection of this small human they had created together. "What should we name him?" Cole asked, unable to look away from his son's face. "James," Tessa said without hesitation. "After my father, James Thatcher, so he knows where he comes from and what we have built for him." "James Thatcher," Cole repeated, testing the name and finding it good. "Welcome to the world, son. You have no idea how wanted you are." Margaret stayed with them for 6 weeks after James was born, helping with the endless tasks that came with a new baby and giving Tessa time to recover from the birth. The 3 of them, 4 including baby James, formed a family unit that felt complete and right, and watching her mother hold her grandson while humming old lullabies from Tessa's own childhood felt like a gift beyond measure. The years that followed were full of the kind of rich, textured life that Tessa had once only dreamed about. James grew strong and healthy, learning to walk and talk and help with small tasks around the ranch, his laughter filling the house with music. 2 years after James, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose Margaret, giving her the middle name in honor of the grandmother who doted on her shamelessly. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, growing from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in the region. Cole taught James everything he knew about ranching, and Tessa made sure both children learned to read and write and do figures, determined that they would have opportunities she had never had. Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives, spending more time at the ranch than in Independence. Her small house in town eventually sold so she could move permanently into the room off the kitchen that had once been Tessa's. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Tessa with a trip to San Francisco, arranging for Margaret to watch the children while they spent a week in the city seeing sights and staying in a real hotel with running water and electric lights. It was a revelation after years of ranch life. But what Tessa remembered most was not the fancy restaurants or the theater performances, but the quiet moments in their hotel room when Cole would pull her close and tell her he loved her, that she was still the best thing that had ever happened to him. "I think about that day in the saloon sometimes," Cole admitted one evening as they walked along the waterfront. "About how close I came to not being there, to not seeing you or hearing what you needed. I had not planned to go into town that day, but something made me change my mind at the last minute. I have always wondered if it was fate." "I do not know if I believe in fate," Tessa said thoughtfully, lacing her fingers through his. "But I believe in choices and chances and the courage to take risks when everything is uncertain. You took a chance on me, and I took a chance on you, and somehow we built something beautiful out of desperation and need." "No somehow about it," Cole said, stopping to frame her face with his hands. "We built it with love and work and commitment. That is not fate, Tessa. That is us choosing each other every single day." They returned to the ranch renewed and reconnected, throwing themselves back into the rhythms of family life with fresh appreciation. James was 9 now and Rose was 7. Both of them sun-browned and confident, helping with chores and exploring the valley with the fearlessness of children who knew they were loved and safe. Margaret, now in her late 60s, moved more slowly but still had the same sharp mind and warm heart that had defined her entire life. She would sit on the porch in her rocking chair and tell the children stories about their mother as a little girl, about their grandfather who had died before they were born, about the hard times and the good times and everything in between. One evening, as the whole family gathered for dinner, James asked the question that Tessa had known would come eventually, but still was not quite prepared to answer. "Mama, how did you and Papa meet? You have never really told us the whole story." Tessa glanced at Cole, who gave her a small nod, leaving the decision to her. She thought about glossing over the truth, about creating a simpler version that would not require explanations of contracts and desperation. But looking at her children's open, curious faces, she decided they deserved honesty. "I met your father," Tessa said slowly, "during one of the hardest times in my life. Your grandmother was very sick, and I needed money for medicine to save her. I made a difficult choice, one that I thought was the only option I had, and your father helped me in a way that changed everything." She told them the story then, all of it, leaving out nothing important but framing it in ways that emphasized the choices made rather than the desperation that drove them. She told them about signing the contract, about coming to the ranch expecting servitude and finding partnership instead, about the slow growth of love between two people who started as strangers bound by necessity. "So Papa bought you?" Rose asked, her young face scrunched in confusion. "Like you buy cattle, in a way," Cole said, speaking up for the first time. "But what I really bought was a chance to know your mother, to prove to her that I was someone worth trusting and maybe even loving. The contract was just paper, Rose. What mattered was what we chose to build together after that." "And you do not regret it?" James pressed, looking at his mother. "You do not wish things had been different?" "Not for one second," Tessa said firmly, reaching across the table to take Cole's hand. "If I could go back and change things, make it so your grandmother never got sick or make it so I never had to sign that contract, I would not do it. Because every hard thing, every scary choice, every uncertain moment led me to this family, to you too and your father and this life. And I would not trade that for anything in the world. Margaret, who had been listening silently, spoke up then. I carried guilt for years about what your mother did for me. I thought I had ruined her life, forced her into a situation she should never have had to face. But watching you all together, seeing the family you have built, I understand now that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations. Your mother saved my life, but in doing so, she also found her own. The children seemed satisfied with that explanation, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But later that night, as Tessa and Cole lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, she thought about her mother's words and found peace in them. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" she asked Cole quietly. "If you had just approached me in town and tried to court me properly?" "I probably would have failed miserably," Cole admitted with a soft laugh. "I am not good with pretty words or fancy gestures. At least with the contract, I had time to show you who I was through actions instead of fumbling through courtship rituals I do not understand." "You sold yourself short," Tessa said, turning to face him in the darkness. "You are plenty good with words when it matters. You have told me you love me in 1,000 different ways over the years, and I have heard every one of them." Cole pulled her closer, his arms secure around her. "I do love you, Tessa Thatcher, more than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow. That is the deal, by the way, for the rest of our lives. I just keep loving you more." "That is a deal I can live with," Tessa murmured. And as sleep claimed her, she thought about the girl she had been that day in the saloon, desperate and afraid and willing to sell her freedom for love, and the woman she had become, strong and content and surrounded by people who loved her fiercely. The journey between those two versions of herself had been hard and uncertain, but she would not have traded a single moment of it, because every step had brought her home to exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing, bringing new challenges and joys in equal measure. James grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning the business with an aptitude that made Cole proud beyond words. Rose surprised them all by showing a gift for healing, tending injured animals with such skill that the local doctor began teaching her properly, visiting the ranch once a month to give her lessons in medicine and anatomy. Margaret lived to see her grandchildren grown, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73 with a smile on her face, and surrounded by the family she loved. They buried her in a spot on the ranch overlooking the valley, planting wildflowers on her grave that bloomed every spring in a riot of color that seemed to capture her vibrant spirit. Tessa felt the loss deeply, but she also felt gratitude for the extra years they had been given, for the medicine that Cole's money had bought all those years ago, for the chance to build a relationship with her mother as an adult, and to give her grandchildren memories of a grandmother who loved them unconditionally. As Tessa and Cole entered their 50s, they began gradually turning over more of the ranch operations to James, who at 25 had already proven himself more than capable. He had married a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch, and they had given Tessa and Cole 2 grandsons who filled the house with noise and laughter, and reminded them both of James at that age. Rose, at 23, had become the closest thing independence had to a real doctor, working alongside the aging physician and earning the trust of the community through her skill and compassion. She had no interest in marriage yet, too focused on her work and her studies, and Tessa respected that choice, remembering her own single-minded determination at that age. One evening in late summer, As Tessa and Cole sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains they had watched together for more than 30 years, Cole suddenly turned to her with an expression that was both serious and tender. "I want you to know something," he said, taking her hand in both of his. "In all the years we have been together, through all the ups and downs and challenges and triumphs, I have never once regretted walking into that saloon and seeing you there. You gave me a life I never knew I needed, Tessa. You gave me everything that matters." "We gave each other everything," Tessa corrected gently. "That is what partnership means. I brought you my strength and determination, and you brought me your steadiness and faith. Together we built something neither of us could have built alone." "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Cole asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "When I told you I expected you to work hard, I said I could work," Tessa recalled, laughing softly. "That I had been working since I was old enough to stand. I was terrified, Cole. Absolutely terrified, but I was also determined not to show it, not to let you see how scared I was." "I knew," Cole admitted. "I could see it in your eyes, the fear underneath the brave face. That was part of what made me determined to prove to you that you were safe here, that I was not going to hurt you or take advantage of you. I needed you to choose to stay, not feel like you had to stay." "And I did choose," Tessa said, squeezing his hand. "Every single day, I choose you in this life. Even now, when my bones ache and my hair is going gray and we have more yesterdays than tomorrows, I choose you." "Good," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I am not done with you yet, Tessa Thatcher. I want at least 30 more years of sunsets on this porch, of watching our grandchildren grow, of falling asleep next to you and waking up to your face. That is the future I am holding out for. Then we better take good care of ourselves," Tessa said with a smile. "Because I plan to give you every single one of those years, and more if I can manage it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the crickets beginning their evening song and the first stars appearing in the velvet sky. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, James and his wife putting the boys to bed, Rose reading aloud from a medical journal, the normal, everyday sounds that meant home and love and a life well lived. Tessa thought about the young woman she had been, standing in that saloon with her heart in her throat and her future uncertain, making a choice that felt like the end of everything, but turned out to be the beginning of everything that mattered. She thought about the years of hard work and slow trust building, of falling in love without meaning to, of discovering that sometimes the things we fear most lead us exactly where we need to go. And as Cole stood and held out his hand to help her up, his smile warm and familiar and still capable of making her heart skip a beat after all these years, Tessa took it without hesitation and let him lead her inside, into the warmth and light and love that they had built together from nothing but determination and hope, and a willingness to believe that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for something beautiful to grow. Their story, which had started in desperation and necessity, had become a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most extraordinary endings, and that the courage to take chances on people and possibilities can transform not just one life but generations to come. In the years ahead, their grandchildren would tell their own children about the grandmother who sold herself to save her mother and the grandfather who bought her freedom and gave her a kingdom in return. And the legend would grow with each telling, but the truth at its heart would remain unchanged. Two people, brought together by circumstance and bound by choice, who loved each other well enough to turn a contract into a promise, a servant into a partner, and a transaction into a lifetime of devotion. That was the true story of Tessa and Cole Thatcher, and it was written not in the pages of books but in the land they tended, the children they raised, and the legacy of love they left behind for all who came after.